Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're taking a seriously fascinating journey into the human mind and into society itself. We're going to completely unpack a comprehensive masterclass on ethics, focusing on a word we use literally every single day, but rarely ever pause to truly understand. That word is values. And look, this isn't just a basic talk about what's good or what's bad. We're diving into the actual operating system that runs our decisions, our societies, and, well, our entire lives. All right, here's our roadmap for today. We're going to dissect the anatomy of values systematically across 6 specific areas: the meaning of values, their characteristics, their importance in our lives, how we actually classify them, some key philosophical debates, and finally, the inculcation of values, basically how we get them in the first place. Let's kick things off with Section 1, the meaning of values. So, what do we actually mean when we throw around a word as common as value? It's a term you hear in corporate boardrooms and at family dinner tables alike, right? But ethically speaking, it has a very precise anatomy. If we trace it all the way back to its roots, we find the Latin word valere, which literally translates to being of worth, something precious, or something dear. In the simplest terms, value is just the worth we attach to a specific thing. But when we shift into ethical language, that definition gets much more robust. Values act as a strict standard for measuring desirability. They are fundamental ideals accepted by a society, maybe a profession, or an institution, and they show up as long-lasting, deeply held beliefs. Now, to really grasp this idea of a standard of measurement, I want you to picture this scenario. You're standing around with some friends, confidently and loudly claiming to be a fearless, courageous person. But then, suddenly, someone sets off a super loud firecracker right behind you, and you jump 2 feet in the air in pure terror, right? If you claim courage, but your instant reaction is just pure panic, you aren't actually meeting the standard of that value. Values aren't just pretty words we say about ourselves. They are the strict internal standards that measure our true behavior against our claims. Moving right along, let's get into Section 2, characteristics of values. Okay, so how do values actually behave out in the real world? First off, they have some very distinct characteristics. They can be moral, immoral, or even amoral, which just means neutral. They're also completely intangible and abstract. Think about it. You can't physically hold respect in your hands. You can only see it play out in action. Crucially, they are hierarchical. For a soldier on the front lines, courage is a paramount, top-tier value. But for a civilian back home, compassion might easily take that #1 spot. Values are also relatively permanent, but, and this is a big but, they can change due to major environmental shifts or a really profound life experience. Take Emperor Ashoka from ancient Indian history. His entire value system flipped from ruthless conquest to complete peace basically overnight after witnessing the sheer devastation of the Kalinga War. And finally, values are strengthened by repetition. The more you practice them, the deeper they take root. But here is a real curveball for you. Are your values always conscious? Actually, no. The source highlights a brilliant example of this. You might consciously claim and truly, honestly believe that you don't hold any beliefs in casteism or patriarchy. But let's say your sister suddenly announces she wants to marry someone from a completely different caste, and your immediate, knee-jerk internal reaction is intense, unexplained anger. Well, that reaction reveals a subconscious value that you are probably entirely unaware of. Our true values often hide just beneath the surface, just waiting for a real-world trigger to expose them. Which brings us right to Section 3, importance in our lives. Why do these invisible internal standards matter so much in our day-to-day existence? Simply put, because values are the engine driving your instant decision-making. Imagine you're walking down the street and you spot an injured puppy on the side of the road. Your internal value system instantly bypasses your logical thinking brain and dictates your immediate reaction. One person might rush right over to help and find water. Another person might feel a pang of pity, maybe complain about reckless drivers, but keep walking. A third person, they might just walk right past without a single-second glance. That split-second decision was completely and totally dictated by your internal values. Because they drive these instant choices, values essentially build our entire character from the ground up. They shape our core attitudes and our judgments toward really complex issues in society. They are literally the invisible thread that links our thoughts directly to our feelings and finally out into our actions. Ultimately, they act as a compass, giving direction to our lives. If your core value is hard work, you'll be up late studying or building a business. If your core value is comfort, well, you'll probably be chilling in the AC watching Netflix.
Your life's trajectory is really just a physical manifestation of your internal values.
Let's switch gears a bit for Section 4, classification of values. We're going to use some rapid-fire comparisons here to classify the massive spectrum of human values. The first major divide is intrinsic versus extrinsic values. Intrinsic values have their own self-worth. They don't depend on any outside factors at all. Think of happiness or peace. They are infinitely valuable just on their own. Extrinsic values, on the other hand, depend entirely on external factors. Take a value like hard work. The raw, back-breaking hard work of a daily wage laborer yields a wildly different outcome than the strategic, calculated hard work of a high-ranking civil servant or a tech CEO, right? The value of that hard work depends extrinsically on where and how it's actually applied. Next up, we have terminal versus instrumental values. Terminal values are the ultimate endpoints, the final destinations we all want to reach in life, like pure bliss, world peace, or lifelong happiness. Instrumental values are exactly what they sound like. They're instruments. They are the tools you use to help you reach those endpoints. So for example, you might use the instrumental value of discipline to eventually achieve the terminal value of success. We can also categorize values by how deeply they're held and, well, who exactly is holding them. We have core values, which are rooted deep within your psyche and are incredibly difficult to change. Contrast that with peripheral values, which are a bit more loosely held and adapt pretty easily over time. Furthermore, we differentiate between institutional values, which define the identity of an entire organization, like a tech company valuing data privacy or a university heavily valuing gender sensitivity, and personal values, which strictly shape an individual's unique character. Now for the really juicy stuff. Section 5, Key Philosophical Debates. Moving into the philosophical realm, scholars have constantly debated the true nature of values across 3 major dividing lines. The very first debate asks a huge question. Are values universal facts or just subjective feelings? The source uses a beautiful old story to illustrate this. When the legendary heartbroken lover, Ranja, was offered a lineup of the absolute most beautiful women in the kingdom by the king, he refused every single one of them. The king was totally baffled, because Ranja's lost love, hair, was considered pretty ordinary looking by society standards. But Ranja simply replied that to see hair's true beauty, you literally need Ranja's eyes. And that story hits the nail on the head for the divide between objective and subjective values. Objective values are based on hard facts and are widely approved by almost everyone, things like the universal desire for peace, love, and compassion. But subjective values, those are based entirely on feelings and opinions, and they vary wildly from person to person. Societal views on complex topics like job reservations, divorce, live-in relationships, or homosexuality are highly subjective. Now, the source absolutely doesn't take a side on these. It simply points out that while everyone might agree on a broad concept like peace, people's values completely diverge on these specific societal issues depending entirely on their personal lenses. The second great debate is whether values are static or dynamic. Static values never really change with time or space. Terminal goals like inner peace have remained completely constant across centuries of human history. But dynamic values? They change dramatically based on your environment and your era. A tribal society living deep in a jungle is going to highly prioritize the dynamic values of raw courage, physical survival, and tight-knit cooperation. But if you move to a modern, comfortable metropolitan city, those values inevitably shift. Sudden physical survival isn't a daily issue anymore, so that society might value comfort, individualism, and cutthroat career competition instead. The final big debate asks, are values universal or regional? While a value like the pursuit of happiness is universally understood across the entire globe, many values are strictly regional or highly culture-specific. You can see this plain as day when comparing Eastern and Western paradigms. Traditional Indian society, for instance, places a massive regional value on collectivism, family-oriented structures, and communal cooperation. Contrast that with Western societies, which often place a much higher value on individualism, self-reliance, and personal competition. Neither one is objectively wrong. They are simply different regional adaptations. Let's bring it all home with Section 6, Inculcation of Values. So after all this, how do we actually get these values in our heads in the first place? The source emphasizes that values absolutely do not just appear out of thin air. We aren't born with some pre-programmed set of beliefs. Instead, they are systematically inculcated through 4 main agencies of socialization. First, our family, the parenting styles we experience and the roles our parents model for us every day. Second, educational institutions, our teachers, the actual content of our textbooks, and of course, peer pressure. Third, broader society. which heavily includes the media we consume, the cinema we watch, and absolutely the algorithms of our social media feeds. And fourth, religion, which provides historical, structured moral frameworks for millions of people. Literally every single value you have was handed to you by one of these four agencies. So, as we wrap up this masterclass on the anatomy of values, I want to leave you with something to really chew on. Think of a value you hold deeply right now, something you would passionately argue for or maybe even fight for. Based on everything we've comprehensively covered today, is that value actually a universal, objective truth? Or is it just a subjective, dynamic belief that was quietly handed to you by your society, your family, or your media feed? It's definitely a question worth asking yourself. Thanks for joining us on this explainer, and keep questioning the standards that guide your life.